Hello everyone and welcome to the Young and the Restless official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The Young and the Restless spoilers for the week of March 16th indicate that Diane Abbott will still be seething from Jack Abbott's betrayal. Will she seduce Victor Newman in the aftermath of it all? For revenge. Diane isn't exactly a fan of Victor's, but considering how worried she was over Jack and his kidnapping, only to find him in bed with his ex-wife, psychopath Patty Williams, Diane will be bent on some vengeance and could turn to Jack's nemesis for payback. The Young and the Restless fans know that Jack was drugged with something during his time with Patty on the yacht. Patty must have slipped a pill in his drink, as Jack became quite groggy once the twosome returned to his room after a nighttime stroll. In fact, even before Patty sauntered into his room, Jack was given some sort of medication during his kidnapping situation to knock him unconscious. While Jack did his best to keep Patty's seductions at bay, he succumbed to her seduction and the two eventually did the deed. It was more than an awkward situation when Diane, along with Kyle Abbott and Billy Abbott, burst into the room to find Jack in bed with Patty during their rescue mission. The threesome moved mountains to try to find Jack and bring him back to Genoa City after they realized Victor had kidnapped him. During the Monday, March 16th episode, Diane was horrified at the sight of Jack in bed with Patty, while both Kyle and Billy were just plain disgusted. As Diane had a meltdown, Jack was still too out of it to explain to her that he had been drugged, and Diane couldn't even muster up the words to tell her husband off. She simply laid a slap across his face that could be felt by Y&R fans watching on. The Young and the Restless spoilers for the March 17th show promise a bold move from Diane, so what exactly will Jack's wife do to retaliate? Diane loathes Victor, but she's beyond upset at her husband for what he's done. During the March 13th episode, when Diane, Billy and Kyle were talking about Jack's rescue, she reminded her son how dark she used to be. Diane also promised she'd ensure those responsible for Jack's disappearance would pay if he got hurt in the process. Diane was willing to do just about anything to bring her husband home, so catching him in the act of cheating humiliated her beyond repair. Victor may have once been an enemy to her, but now that her husband is her target, those feelings of animosity toward Victor could vanish. But how far will Diane go to seek vengeance on Jack? Jack petting Patty was a proverbial slap in the face for Diane because of Patty's history, not to mention the rivalry Diane has shared in the past with the mentally unstable woman. Could Diane decide to dish the same revenge her husband's way by hitting the sheets with the moustache? The Young and the Restless spoilers remind fans that Victor isn't on the greatest of terms with his wife Nikki Newman, so sleeping with Diane might also serve a purpose for him to get back at his wife for what he believes is over-concern for her ex-husband Jack. The storm had been building long before anyone in Genoa City truly realized just how devastating it would become. In the days leading up to the week of March 16th, tension simmered beneath the surface, and at the center of it all stood Diane Abbott, a woman whose heart had just been shattered in the most humiliating way imaginable. What should have been a triumphant rescue had instead turned into a nightmare she would never forget. Diane had been frantic with fear while Jack Abbott was missing, convinced something terrible had happened to the man she loved. Every moment without him felt like an eternity, and she had poured every ounce of her energy into bringing him home safely. But when the truth finally revealed itself, it wasn't relief that greeted her. It was betrayal, so raw and painful that it threatened to ignite something far darker within her. The nightmare had begun with Jack's mysterious kidnapping, a frightening ordeal that left his family scrambling for answers. As the Young and the Restless fans know, Jack's time aboard the yacht with the dangerously unstable Patty Williams had been anything but voluntary. At some point during their tense captivity together, Patty slipped something into Jack's drink, a pill that slowly dulled his senses and clouded his judgment. The moment they returned to his room after a quiet nighttime stroll along the yacht's deck, the drug began to take hold, leaving Jack groggy and disoriented. Even before that moment, during the initial stages of the kidnapping, he had already been given some form of medication meant to knock him unconscious and keep him compliant. It was clear that Patty had been carefully manipulating every detail of the situation, weaving her twisted fantasy around a man who was barely able to keep himself alert, let alone resist her. Despite the fog creeping through his mind, Jack tried to hold his ground against Patty's relentless advances. He knew her history, knew the darkness that lived inside her, and did his best to push back against the seductive trap she was laying before him. But the drug clouded his judgment and drained his strength, leaving him vulnerable in ways he never would have been otherwise. Patty's persistence eventually wore down the fragile resistance he had left, and the situation spiraled into something neither dignified nor voluntary. What followed was a deeply compromising moment that would soon explode into a scandal far larger than anyone could have predicted. In the end, Jack found himself in bed with the very woman who had orchestrated his captivity, unaware that the most devastating moment of his life was about to crash through the door. Meanwhile, back in Genoa City, Diane had been leading the charge to find her husband. Alongside Kyle Abbott and Billy Abbott, she pushed forward with determination, refusing to rest until Jack was safely back home. The trio had moved mountains searching for him, fueled by the belief that Victor Newman had something to do with the disappearance. Every clue, every lead, and every sleepless hour had been dedicated to bringing Jack back where he belonged. Their search eventually led them straight to the yacht where the long-awaited rescue mission finally unfolded. But what they found inside that room was not the reunion Diane had been praying for. When the door burst open, the scene waiting on the other side was enough to stop them all in their tracks. Jack Abbott lay in bed with Patty Williams, the woman whose dangerous obsession had haunted their lives for years. The shock in the room was almost suffocating. Diane's heart shattered instantly as the horrifying reality unfolded before her eyes, while Kyle and Billy stared in disbelief and disgust at what they were witnessing. For them, it looked exactly like the worst possible betrayal. A husband caught in the act with a woman who had long been a source of chaos and madness in their lives. In that single moment, all the hope and determination that had fueled their rescue mission collapsed into something bitter and humiliating. During the March 16th episode, Diane's reaction revealed just how deeply the moment had wounded her. She stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing, while Jack, still groggy from the drugs, could barely form a coherent explanation. The words he desperately needed to say never came, leaving Diane alone with her heartbreak and rage. The pain on her face told the entire story, and yet she couldn't even find the strength to unleash the fury building inside her. Instead, she delivered one sharp, stinging slap across Jack's face, a blow so powerful it seemed to echo far beyond the walls of the room. Fans watching at home could practically feel the impact, a raw expression of betrayal that spoke louder than any words she could have spoken in that moment. But the story doesn't end with that slap. The emotional fallout continues to ripple through Genoa City as the week unfolds, and spoilers for the March 17th episode hint that Diane is far from finished reacting to this devastating betrayal. Those who know Diane's history understand that she is not a woman who simply walks away from humiliation. During the March 13th episode, when she had been discussing Jack's rescue with Billy and Kyle, Diane openly reflected on the darker chapters of her past. She reminded her son that she had once been capable of things she wasn't proud of, and she made it clear that anyone responsible for Jack's disappearance would pay dearly if he had been harmed. At the time, her words were fueled by love and fear for her husband, but now those same emotions are twisting into something far more dangerous. Diane had been willing to do absolutely anything to bring Jack home safely. She had thrown herself into the rescue mission without hesitation, risking everything for the man she believed loved her just as fiercely. That devotion made the moment she caught him in bed with Patty all the more devastating. To Diane, it wasn't just a betrayal, it was a humiliation she could barely endure. Patty wasn't just another woman, she was someone Diane had clashed with before, a rival whose instability had made her a constant threat. Seeing Jack with her felt like a personal attack, a wound inflicted directly on Diane's pride and heart. Now, as the dust begins to settle, Diane's thoughts may drift toward a dangerous and unexpected form of revenge. In the past, she has never been fond of Victor Newman, a man whose long-standing rivalry with Jack Abbott has shaped much of Genoa City's history. Yet circumstances have a way of shifting loyalties and erasing old grudges when the need for vengeance becomes strong enough. With Jack now standing as the target of her anger, Diane might begin to see Victor in a very different light. After all, aligning with Jack's greatest enemy could be the ultimate way to strike back at the man who shattered her trust. The possibility becomes even more complicated when Victor's own personal life is considered. His marriage to Nikki Newman has been anything but stable lately, and tension continues to simmer between them. Victor has grown increasingly frustrated with what he perceives as Nikki's excessive concern for her ex-husband Jack. In Victor's mind, that lingering loyalty crosses a line he finds difficult to accept. Under those circumstances, the idea of sleeping with Diane could serve multiple purposes for him. Revenge against Nikki, a strategic jab at Jack, and perhaps even a twisted form of satisfaction in watching the Abbott family unravel. And so, as Genoa City braces for the emotional fallout of Jack's scandalous discovery, one question lingers heavily in the air. How far is Diane Abbott truly willing to go in her quest for revenge? The humiliation she suffered in that yacht bedroom may prove impossible for her to ignore. Jack's night with Patty already felt like a slap in the face, especially given Patty's long and troubled history with them all. But if Diane decides to retaliate in kind by stepping into Victor Newman's arms and hitting the sheets with the mustache himself, the consequences could send shockwaves through every corner of Genoa City. In a world where love, betrayal, and vengeance often walk hand in hand, Diane's next move may be the one that changes everything. As the emotional wreckage of that shocking discovery lingered in the air, the aftermath began to ripple through Genoa City like a slow-moving storm gathering strength. Diane Abbott left the yacht carrying far more than just the sting of humiliation. She carried a burning sense of betrayal that refused to fade. Every step she took away from that room replayed the image in her mind. Jack Abbott lying in bed beside Patty Williams, the woman whose instability had haunted their lives for years. It didn't matter that Jack had looked disoriented or that something about the moment felt strangely wrong. What Diane saw was betrayal, plain and simple. The humiliation of it struck deeper than words could ever capture, and as the hours passed, the shock slowly began to transform into something far more dangerous. Pain, when left to simmer long enough, has a way of turning into revenge, and Diane was beginning to feel that shift within herself. Back in Genoa City, the emotional fallout only intensified as the Abbott family struggled to make sense of what had happened. Kyle Abbott remained visibly shaken by the discovery. His respect for his father suddenly tangled with confusion and disappointment. Billy Abbott, never one to hold back his opinions, found the entire situation revolting and almost impossible to excuse. To them, the scene they had witnessed felt unforgivable, regardless of whatever explanation Jack might eventually offer. Yet Jack himself remained trapped in a fog of confusion, still struggling to piece together what had actually occurred during his captivity on the yacht. The lingering effects of the drugs Patty had slipped into his system left him fighting to regain clarity, and the cruel irony was that the one person he needed to explain the truth to, Diane, had already walked away before he could say a word. But Diane's mind was no longer searching for explanations. Instead, it drifted towards something colder, something darker, something she herself had once warned others about. During the desperate search for Jack, she had openly reminded Kyle that she was not always the person she had become in recent years. There had been a time when Diane Abbott was capable of ruthless decisions, when vengeance and survival had driven her every move. She had tried to leave that version of herself behind, burying it beneath years of rebuilding trust and proving she had changed. Yet humiliation has a way of resurrecting the ghosts people try hardest to escape, and now that darker side of Diane was beginning to stir again. The question was no longer whether she had been wronged, it was how she intended to respond. In the quiet corners of her thoughts, one name began to rise again and again: Victor Newman. For years, Victor had been one of Jack Abbott's most relentless rivals, a man whose clashes with the Abbott family had shaped countless battles across Genoa City. Diane herself had never been particularly fond of Victor, viewing him as manipulative, calculating, and often dangerous. Yet in moments like this, alliances can shift in the most unexpected ways. Victor represented something powerful, something symbolic, and in Diane's mind, he might also represent the ultimate weapon of revenge. If Jack's betrayal had cut her deeply, then aligning herself with his greatest enemy could be the perfect way to return the favor. At the same time, Victor Newman's own life was far from peaceful. His relationship with Nikki Newman had been strained, weighed down by tension that had been building for weeks. Victor had grown increasingly frustrated by what he believed was Nikki's lingering concern for Jack Abbott, a connection that refused to disappear despite the passage of time. In Victor's world, loyalty meant everything, and the idea that his wife still cared about her ex-husband had begun to gnaw at his patience. That frustration created a dangerous opening, one that someone like Diane might easily recognize and exploit. If their paths were to cross at the right moment, the spark between revenge and opportunity could ignite something neither of them originally intended. As these emotional currents swirl beneath the surface, the week ahead promises a bold and potentially explosive move from Diane Abbott. The humiliation she suffered on that yacht will not fade quietly into the background, and the woman Genoa City once feared may be stepping back into the spotlight. Diane has always been fiercely protective of her pride, and being publicly wounded by Jack, especially with Patty Williams involved, strikes at the very core of who she is. The idea of retaliating in the same way Jack hurt her is beginning to take shape in her mind. If Jack could shatter her trust so carelessly, then perhaps it was time for him to feel the same sting of betrayal. And that possibility leads to a question that could shake the entire town. What if Diane decides to strike back by turning to Victor Newman himself? The mere thought carries enormous consequences, not only for Jack but for Nikki as well. Victor has never been a man who avoids complicated situations, and if the opportunity presented itself, he might see Diane's anger as a useful tool in his own battles. For Diane, stepping into Victor's world could become the ultimate act of revenge, a way to make Jack feel the same humiliation she endured when that bedroom door burst open. In Genoa City, where emotions run high and history never truly fades, one impulsive decision can change everything. And so the stage is set for what could become one of the most dramatic twists yet. Diane Abbott stands at a crossroads between heartbreak and vengeance, and whichever path she chooses will send shockwaves through every corner of the Abbott and Newman families. Jack may still believe he can explain what really happened on that yacht, but time may already be slipping away from him. Because if Diane decides to make her bold move and if Victor Newman is willing to play along, the fallout will be far more devastating than anyone could have predicted. In a town where love, rivalry, and revenge constantly collide, the next chapter of this story may be the one that leaves the deepest scars of all.